The day my aunt claimed I owed her my success, she launched a scheme to tear down everything I had built. But I'm Ethan, 29 years old, and I never thought I'd find myself here, caught in a battle of ownership over my own life and success. My Aunt Carol, 54, has been a significant presence in my life for as long as I can remember. Growing up, she was the aunt who showed up for every recital, every graduation, and every family gathering, making sure I never missed her smile from the front row. But as I got older, what I once saw as unwavering support started to feel more like a form of control. I began to understand that her love came with strings attached, ones she'd tug harder on as I achieved more. Carol is the kind of person with a strong presence and even stronger opinions. She's never married and never had kids of her own. Instead, she poured her energy into her career in finance and her investments in her family, as she likes to call them. Growing up, I often heard her refer to herself as the guiding force for me and a few other cousins, always talking about her sacrifices and contributions as though we were some sort of joint venture she expected to yield a return. I didn't pay much mind to it back then, assuming it was just her way of showing pride in her family. But it was when I hit my late 20s and found myself in a well-paying job as a project manager that things started to get complicated. Carol began inserting herself into my decisions, uninvited, and seemed to think she had a right to weigh in on everything I did, where I invested my money, what car I drove, even who I chose to date. She was convinced that she knew better than I did, that her experience and wisdom made her the final authority on my choices. 2 months ago, she started suggesting that I owed her some sort of acknowledgement for getting me where I am. It started with small comments, almost casual. "You know, Ethan, you wouldn't be half the man you are without me guiding you," she'd say with a smile, giving me that patronizing look she always wore when she thought she was right. I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just being dramatic. But last month, things escalated. I had just signed a big deal at work, the kind of project that could elevate my career even further, and when I told her about it, she seemed pleased, at first. But then, as if she couldn't help herself, she leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You know, Ethan, you really should be sharing your success with those who got you there. I sacrificed a lot to make sure you could succeed, and I think it's time you recognize that." I'll admit, her words took me by surprise. I felt a strange mix of frustration and disbelief. I'd never heard anyone speak so directly about expecting credit for someone else's achievements. "So," I asked, "what exactly are you getting at, Aunt Carol?" She leaned back, taking on a tone that sounded both patient and condescending, the way someone might talk to a child. "Ethan, I'm saying that if it weren't for me, my financial advice, my connections, my guidance, you'd be nowhere near where you are today. It's only fair that I get a say in how you use your success." At this point, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my irritation must have shown through. "I appreciate all you've done, Aunt Carol, but I worked for this. I stayed up late studying, took on internships, and built my own connections. I've made my career what it is." Her response was as dismissive as it was unsettling. "Oh, Ethan, don't be so naive. You think you did all this alone? You would have been lost without my guidance. I deserve a say, and if you're smart, you'll realize that." She gave me a cold smile, as though daring me to challenge her. Something in her tone told me that she was serious, and that realization hit me harder than I'd like to admit. I tried to reason with her, explaining that while I appreciated her advice, my decisions were my own, and I didn't owe her control over my life. But she just shook her head, a hint of something almost vengeful in her eyes, and walked away, muttering under her breath about ingratitude. Since that conversation, things have only gotten stranger. Carol has been calling me incessantly, asking invasive questions about my job, my savings, and even personal details I've never shared with her before. It felt intrusive, but I kept telling myself she'd eventually back off. My girlfriend, Haley, who's 27, picked up on my frustration and suggested that maybe Aunt Carol was just lonely and needed attention. I wanted to believe her, but something in the pit of my stomach told me this was different. Then, about a week ago, I started noticing small issues at work. An email from a client mysteriously went missing. My boss, Dave, received an anonymous complaint alleging that I'd mishandled a project deadline. I shrugged it off as bad luck at first, but then it happened again. A crucial file disappeared from our shared drive, and a rumor started circulating that I'd been planning to leave the company for a competitor. I was blindsided. The idea that I would jump ship seemed absurd to everyone who knew me, but the rumors still spread. Haley tried to reassure me, but I could see even she was getting concerned. I hadn't told her about the conversation with Aunt Carol, thinking it sounded too paranoid. But I couldn't shake the thought that maybe this wasn't just a series of unfortunate coincidences. Carol had connections in our industry, and it wasn't beyond her to use them. I'd seen her do similar things to people she believed had wronged her in the past. I just never thought she'd turn that side of herself on me. Today, Carol called again, her tone sickeningly sweet. She asked if I'd come to my senses yet, acting as if we just had a casual disagreement rather than her demanding control over my life. When I told her, firmly, that my answer hadn't changed, she let out a small, cold laugh and said, "Well, if that's your decision, Ethan, I hope you're prepared for the consequences. Sometimes, you have to learn the hard way." Those words echoed in my head long after I hung up. I could sense a threat in her voice, something both unsettling and infuriating. I've never felt more on edge or unsure of what my own family might do to me. I used to think family meant unconditional support, but now, as I stand here watching my own success unravel in inexplicable ways, I'm starting to wonder if Aunt Carol is determined to teach me a lesson, one I never asked for. And maybe, just maybe, she's willing to destroy everything I've built to do it. It's been a few weeks since my confrontation with Aunt Carol, and things have only gotten worse. It feels like every corner of my life is under attack, and the worst part is, I can't point to a single person responsible, at least, not without sounding paranoid. I keep thinking it's all in my head, but the signs are too obvious to ignore. The issues at work have ramped up. Just a few days after that missing email and the mysterious complaint, another problem arose. I submitted a proposal for a major project, a potential game-changer for my team. But when I checked in with my boss, Dave, he said he hadn't received anything. Confused, I dug into my sent folder, but the email with the attachment was gone. I knew I'd sent it. I triple-check these things because they're my responsibility, and losing a file of that magnitude is a major red flag. Then, out of nowhere, I started receiving passive-aggressive remarks from colleagues, hinting that I'd been bad-mouthing our department to outsiders. I didn't know what they were talking about, but somehow, rumors had started that I'd been trash-talking our team to people outside the company. It was absurd. Why would I sabotage my own department? But the rumors started gaining traction. People were avoiding me in meetings, and the usual friendly camaraderie felt cold and forced. At first, I brushed it off as office gossip gone wild. But when I received an anonymous message on my phone saying, "Be careful who you trust," I started to question everything. My mind kept going back to Aunt Carol. I tried to push the thought away, thinking that maybe I was overestimating her influence. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how easily she could pull strings. Carol had been in the finance world for years. She had connections, knew people in HR and management circles, and wouldn't hesitate to call in favors if she felt wronged. One night, I brought up my suspicions to Haley. She listened intently, but I could tell she was hesitant to jump to conclusions. "Ethan, I get why you'd feel that way," she said, "but this sounds like some really elaborate stuff. Are you sure it isn't just bad luck? Or maybe someone at work has a grudge?" Haley was trying to be supportive, but I could tell she was struggling to believe Carol would go to these lengths. I wanted to believe that, too, but too many things were adding up for this to be pure coincidence. The real breaking point came last week. A close friend of mine, Lucas, who I've known since college, suddenly stopped returning my calls. It was weird because Lucas and I talk all the time. We're both in similar industries, so we share a lot of mutual friends and professional contacts. After a few days of radio silence, I decided to swing by his apartment and ask him if everything was okay. When he opened the door, I could see tension etched on his face. "Hey, man, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but he cut me off before I could say much more. "Look, Ethan, I don't know what game you're playing, but I don't appreciate it," he said, crossing his arms. "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely clueless. Lucas sighed, looking at me with what felt like disappointment. I don't know why you'd go behind my back like that. I heard from a reliable source that you've been saying some pretty nasty things about me to mutual clients. I get that we're in the same industry, but I thought we were friends. I was stunned. Lucas, I haven't said anything about you to anyone, especially not our clients. Why would I even do that? He looked at me, searching for some hint of sincerity, before shaking his head. I want to believe you, Ethan, but there are too many people saying the same thing. I'm not sure who to trust anymore. I tried explaining, assuring him that I'd never say anything to jeopardize his reputation, but he just seemed so tired, so drained by the rumors. Walking away from his apartment, I felt a mix of anger, confusion, and desperation. It was like my life was being systematically dismantled piece by piece, and I had no way of proving my innocence. When I got home, Haley could tell something was wrong. I filled her in on what happened with Lucas, feeling more defeated than ever. Ethan, this is beyond strange. If it really is Carol, I know she's intense, but I can't believe she'd do this. It's almost like she's trying to isolate you, she said, her brows knitting in concern. The thought chilled me to the core. My aunt was literally chipping away at the foundation of everything I'd built. My job, my friendships, even my relationship with Haley was starting to feel the strain. Every day, I'd wake up wondering what new nightmare I'd have to deal with, and the helplessness was eating away at me. The following Monday, Dave called me into his office. He looked tense, his hands steepled on his desk as he watched me with an unreadable expression. Ethan, I'm concerned. Your performance has been slipping, and there have been too many incidents to ignore. Missing files, rumors about you leaving, even a couple of clients have made remarks. I know you're a hard worker, but something's going on here. I tried to explain, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Dave was one of the more reasonable people in the office, but even he was starting to doubt me. Look, he said finally, if there's something personal going on, I'm willing to give you some time to sort it out. But if this keeps up, we'll have to talk about your future here. The weight of his words sank in, and I could barely respond. I knew I was on the edge of losing everything, and the worst part was that I couldn't even pinpoint why. After work, I went straight to Haley's, needing her presence more than ever. Ethan, this is getting out of control, she said, her tone a mix of worry and frustration. We need to figure out what's going on before this gets any worse. Maybe, she hesitated, maybe it's time to talk to Carol directly. See if she admits to anything. At the very least, it might give you peace of mind. The thought of confronting Carol made my stomach twist, but she was right. If I didn't address this head-on, I'd only spiral further into doubt and paranoia. I was terrified to face her, knowing she'd probably deny everything or worse, turn the tables on me. But the way things were going, I didn't have a choice. That night, I sent Aunt Carol a simple text. Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk to you about something important. The three dots flashed for a moment before her response popped up. Of course, Ethan. I'll be at the cafe on 5th at noon. Something about the quick reply made my skin crawl. It was almost as if she'd been expecting this all along, as though this was some game she was orchestrating. I went to bed that night, my mind racing with every possible scenario, every argument, every defense I might need. The next day, as I walked into the cafe, I saw Carol already sitting there, a serene smile on her face, sipping her coffee as if nothing had changed. She looked up, her expression calm, almost pleased. It was the same face I'd seen at every family gathering, the same familiar smile, but somehow it felt different now, calculated, cold, even a little sinister. I took a deep breath, my pulse hammering as I sat down across from her, feeling the weight of her gaze. It was time to find out the truth. Sitting across from Carol in the cafe felt surreal. This was the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes, who'd read me bedtime stories when I was little. Yet here she was, seated calmly across from me, almost smug, as though she was savoring the confusion and anger in my expression. I could feel my pulse in my ears, and every fiber of my being told me to walk out, but I had to know. I had to understand why she'd go this far. Aunt Carol, I started, my voice unsteady. I don't even know how to say this, but Things have been happening in my life, strange things. Work issues, rumors with friends. And I can't help but feel like you're somehow involved. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, Ethan, I'm surprised. Do you really think I'd do something like that? Honestly, I don't know, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. But too much has happened for it to be a coincidence. My emails disappear, people are hearing things I supposedly said, things I never actually said. I'm losing friends, losing trust at work. And it all started after you said I owed you. Her face shifted slightly, the corners of her mouth twitching into a tight smile. Ethan, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. But maybe if you're having these problems, you should consider where you'd be without me in your life. My hands tightened into fists under the table. Aunt Carol, with all due respect, I got here on my own. I know you've been there, but my success, my hard work, is mine. No one deserves credit for my life except me. She sighed, almost pityingly. You really don't get it, do you, Ethan? I've been the one paving the path for you since you were a child. The advice, the connections, the financial wisdom. I've been molding you for years. And now, you're acting like I was just some background character in your success story? Do you know how ungrateful that sounds? I could feel my face getting hot. Are you serious? This isn't about gratitude, Aunt Carol. This is my life. You don't get a say in it just because you helped me along the way. Her eyes narrowed, the warmth fading into something sharper, more intense. Ethan, I invested in you because I saw potential. I gave up parts of my life for you. And this is how you repay me? By claiming independence, as if I didn't lay the very foundation you're standing on? My jaw tightened. You didn't lay the foundation. You offered support, like any family member would. But that doesn't mean you own my success. You don't get to control my choices because of things you did years ago. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of genuine hurt in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. You're too blind to see it now, but without my guidance, you'd still be floundering. You've been lucky to have me, and I'm not going to sit back and watch you throw away all I've done for you by making stupid decisions. You have no idea how many people would kill for what I've done for you. I let out a bitter laugh. So this is for my own good? Sabotaging my job, isolating me from friends, creating chaos in my life. This is your way of helping me? She shrugged, unfazed. Sometimes, tough love is necessary. You're too young and inexperienced to realize it, but you're making mistakes. You're throwing away the opportunities one created for you by not acknowledging my role. The audacity of her words left me speechless. I was staring at a person who genuinely believed she had the right to undermine my entire life because she'd given me advice and helped with minor things over the years. I felt a pit open up in my stomach, a sickening realization that Carol didn't just think she deserved credit, she thought she deserved control. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. Carol, this is my life. And the fact that you think it's your right to correct my choices by tearing everything down is, honestly, it's sick. I don't care if you think you helped me or guided me. You don't get to do this. You don't get to hurt me under the guise of helping. Her smile faded, replaced by an icy expression. You're so naive, Ethan. You have no idea how cutthroat the world is. I'm doing what's necessary to ensure you don't ruin everything I've helped you build. You'll thank me one day. I felt like I was talking to a stranger. This woman, my aunt, who'd once been my confidant, my family, was now someone who believed she had the right to manipulate my life like a puppet master. I'm never going to thank you for this, Carol. This isn't protection. It's control, and I won't let you ruin my life just to prove a point. She laughed softly, a bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. You'll come around, Ethan. You can resent me all you want, but you'll realize I'm right eventually. And until you do, I'll keep stepping in when you make bad decisions. You can't stop me. I shook my head, disgusted. This is insane. You're insane if you think you have any right to meddle in my life like this. Her face tightened, but she kept her composure. You don't understand, Ethan, but you will. I know what's best for you, even if you don't. I pushed my chair back, standing up abruptly. I couldn't sit there another second, listening to her justify her actions as though they were done out of love. I'm done with this, Aunt Carol. You're not welcome in my life if you're going to keep playing these twisted games. Family doesn't do this. She shrugged, as if my words meant nothing. Do what you need to, Ethan. But don't be surprised when things get tough without me there to keep you in line. I felt a surge of anger but forced myself to walk away, not looking back. Leaving that cafe, I felt a sense of betrayal deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. Carol's words replayed in my mind, her twisted logic claiming she had the right to interfere in my life because she'd invested in me. It was a violation of trust that I hadn't thought possible from someone I'd looked up to for years. The walk back to my apartment was a blur. I felt both numb and furious, a mix of emotions that left me disoriented. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a revelation that someone I trusted thought they had the right to tear down everything I'd worked for if I didn't live up to their expectations. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling. I tried to call Lucas again to see if I could explain things one last time, but his number went straight to voicemail. Haley texted, asking if I wanted to meet up, but I didn't have the energy to respond. I felt drained, like the life had been sucked out of me. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone, stripped of support and isolated because of one person's twisted need for control. It was clear now that Carol wouldn't stop until she'd bent me to her will or ruined everything I had. And I didn't know how to protect myself from someone willing to go to such lengths. I stared at my phone, scrolling through my contacts, wondering who I could trust, who I could turn to. Carol had gotten under my skin, into my life, and now it felt like she was everywhere, pulling strings I couldn't even see. As I sat there, grappling with the weight of her betrayal, I realized this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a battle I hadn't anticipated, one that would require me to fight for my own life, my own independence, against the very person who claimed to be helping me. And the worst part was, I knew she was just getting started. In the days following that confrontation with Aunt Carol, I felt like a man on the brink. Each day brought new, subtle cracks in the structure of my life. Every morning, I'd wake up dreading what might come next. Another missing email, a rumor, a client or friend with a sudden, inexplicable coldness. My professional reputation was tanking, and my social circles were shrinking. It felt like Carol's reach was limitless, each thread of sabotage expertly woven, just beneath the surface, making it hard to trace back to her directly. I spent days sorting through my records, going over email threads, cross-referencing meetings, anything that might shed light on what was happening. I found messages and file modifications I hadn't made, strange appointments on my calendar that I hadn't scheduled. Carol had access to my personal life in a way that felt almost supernatural, as though she was always one step ahead. In a moment of desperation, I started reaching out to acquaintances Carol and I shared, hoping to piece together what she might have been saying or doing behind the scenes. Most of them were hesitant to speak, clearly uncomfortable with the notion of getting in the middle of a family dispute. But one of them, a former colleague of hers named Patricia, finally agreed to meet me for coffee. Patricia was a no-nonsense kind of woman in her mid-50s, someone who didn't mince words. When I explained my situation, she nodded gravely, her expression one of both pity and understanding. "You're not the first person Carol's done this to, Ethan," she began, her voice low. "She's always had this need for control. It's how she operates in business and in life. If someone doesn't play by her rules, she doesn't just let it go. She makes sure they regret it. I've seen her ruin careers, reputations, even family relationships just to prove a point." Hearing this confirmed my worst fears. "So, you think she's really behind everything? The missing files, the rumors?" Patricia looked at me, her eyes a mixture of empathy and caution. "I can't say for certain, but I know her patterns. If she thinks you're ungrateful, she'll do whatever it takes to make you acknowledge her, even if it means tearing you down first." I left that meeting feeling both validated and unnerved. Carol's behavior wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern, a twisted, well-practiced routine, and I was her latest target. I realized I couldn't just sit back and wait for things to blow over. If I didn't do something, she'd keep coming at me, chipping away at everything I'd worked for until there was nothing left. I needed a plan to expose her actions, and I needed to do it fast. Back at home, I sketched out an idea. If Carol was using her connections to ruin my life, I'd need to gather evidence of her interference and confront her in a way she couldn't deny or spin. I decided to start recording conversations, saving copies of every email, every text, and every suspicious incident at work. This wasn't going to be easy, and it was risky. If Carol found out, she could retaliate in ways I hadn't even considered. But I was backed into a corner. There was no other way. The first break came about a week later. One of my clients, Thomas, an old friend of Carol's, called me unexpectedly to discuss our partnership. "Ethan, I wanted to check in," he said, his tone guarded. "I heard some concerning things recently, and I thought it was only fair to give you a chance to clear the air." My stomach twisted. Concerning things? Like what? Thomas hesitated, as though weighing his words. "Look, I've known Carol for a long time. She reached out recently, said she was concerned about you, that you've been unsteady. She mentioned you were making questionable decisions, maybe even thinking of leaving the industry." The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. "Thomas, I don't know what she told you, but I'm not planning to leave, and I'm as committed as ever." "I have no idea why she'd say any of that." He sighed, sounding tired. "I appreciate the clarification, Ethan, but honestly, Carol sounded convinced. She said you've been struggling, that she wanted to help you avoid making a mess of things." It sounded genuine. I clenched my jaw, struggling to keep my frustration in check. "Thomas, she's lying. This is her way of undermining me, of controlling things. Please, don't let her manipulate you." After a long pause, he agreed to give me the benefit of the doubt, but I could tell he was shaken. Carol had managed to turn even my clients against me, her influence weaving through every aspect of my life like a poison. I decided it was time for my plan to go live. I crafted a detailed email to my boss, Dave, outlining the strange incidents and mentioning the connection to Carol without explicitly accusing her. I hoped to plant the seed, make him see that the mistakes weren't just me being careless. To back it up, I attached all the strange records I'd compiled. Missing emails, fake appointments, anything that hinted at interference. It was a risk, but at this point, I had nothing left to lose. The following day, Dave called me into his office. He looked tired, and I could tell he was skeptical, but something in my documentation had caught his attention. "Ethan, this is a lot. I don't know what's going on, but I have to admit, the evidence you've shown me is hard to ignore. If what you're saying is true, then we're dealing with something serious here." I nodded, relieved he was at least listening. "All I'm asking is that you give me a chance to clear my name. I know it sounds crazy, but I think Carol is behind all of this." Dave sighed. "Family can be complicated. But Ethan, if this is true, you'll need to confront her in a way that's beyond dispute. You can't accuse her without undeniable proof." And that's when it hit me. I needed a witness, someone who could hear Carol admit to her interference without her realizing it. My mind raced, and I quickly made plans to meet up with Haley, hoping she'd be willing to help me. Later that night, I laid out the plan for Haley. "I want to meet with Carol again, somewhere public, and confront her. I need you to be there, close enough to hear what she says but out of sight. If I can get her to admit what she's done, we'll finally have something concrete." Haley looked hesitant, but after a moment's thought, she nodded. "All right, I'll do it. But Ethan, are you sure she'll confess? She might just deny everything. I know it's risky, but Carol has a way of gloating when she thinks she's won. If I push her enough, she might reveal her hand." The next day, I sent Carol a text, asking to meet for closure. She responded almost immediately, with an unsettling enthusiasm, as if she'd been waiting for me to reach out. We arranged to meet at a quiet park where she'd feel comfortable enough to let her guard down. When the day arrived, Haley and I arrived early. She found a bench within earshot, pretending to read a book, while I waited at the designated spot. Carol showed up, wearing a serene smile that only fueled my anger. "Ethan," she greeted, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I'm glad you came to your senses." I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "I wanted to understand why, Carol. Why go to these lengths? Why try to ruin everything I've worked for?" She tilted her head, her smile never faltering. Ethan, you don't understand. I'm not ruining anything. I'm saving you. Left to your own devices, you'd throw away everything. But with me guiding you, you'll stay on the path to success. That's not your decision to make. I shot back, my voice barely containing my frustration. What you're doing isn't guidance, it's sabotage. She shrugged, unfazed. Sabotage is such a harsh word. I see it as redirecting. You may resent me now, but someday, you'll understand that I was right. I could feel my anger bubbling over, but I forced myself to stay composed. So, you admit it then? You've been interfering with my work, my friendships, everything? She smiled, her expression almost triumphant. Yes, Ethan. If that's what it takes to make you see sense, then yes. You owe me this respect, this acknowledgement. And until you realize that, I'll do whatever it takes to remind you. My heart pounded as I saw Haley discreetly texting on her phone, capturing every word. Carol's confession, so calmly and arrogantly delivered, was finally on record. I leaned back, letting her see the realization dawn in my eyes. Thank you, Aunt Carol. I think I finally understand exactly what you've been doing. Her smile faltered, just for a moment, as she sensed something was off. But it was too late. Haley had everything we needed, and Carol's own words were the key to unmasking her scheme. I stood up, looking down at her with a mixture of pity and determination. You're not my mentor or my savior, Carol. You're just someone who couldn't handle the idea that I could succeed without you. Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of her influence finally begin to lift. I'd won this battle, but I knew the war was far from over. After Haley and I left the park, my mind raced, both with relief and a sense of finality. Carol had finally admitted everything, her arrogance blinding her to the fact that I was gathering evidence. But a single recording wouldn't be enough to end her influence over my life. Carol had years of connections, people who respected and believed in her. If I wanted to free myself entirely, I needed to make sure her web of lies unraveled in front of the people she valued most. That night, I stayed up late, planning the final step. I reached out to a few key family members, including my parents and some mutual acquaintances who'd been swayed by Carol's stories about my unsteady behavior. I asked them to meet me at my parents' house on Sunday, hinting that there was something important they all needed to hear. My parents, who'd heard bits and pieces of my frustrations over the past few weeks, seemed concerned but supportive. I knew they suspected Carol had overstepped, but they hadn't seen the full extent of her manipulation. This would be their chance to see the truth. When Sunday arrived, I was a ball of nerves. Haley had agreed to be there with me, her steady presence a reassuring reminder that I wasn't alone in this. As family and acquaintances began to arrive, I could see their curiosity and concern. Carol, of course, arrived fashionably late, with that familiar smile that had hidden her true nature for so long. She acted as though this gathering was just another family event, chatting amiably, greeting everyone with warmth. It made me sick to watch. Finally, when everyone was seated, I cleared my throat, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Thank you all for coming, I began, glancing around the room. I know this might seem unusual, but there's something important that I need to share with you. Something that's been affecting my life in ways I can't ignore anymore. Carol sat near the front, her expression serene, as though she had nothing to fear. She gave me a tight smile, as if to say, go on, give them the sob story you think will change their minds, but I was ready. I took out my phone, pulling up the recording from our conversation in the park. Some of you might have heard things about me recently, I continued. Rumors, doubts about my reliability, my behavior. These stories didn't come out of nowhere. They were planted, deliberately, by someone I trusted. A few people shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Carol, who was beginning to look less assured. Her smile wavered, but she stayed silent. I hit play, and Carol's voice filled the room, confident, clear, and damning. Her words echoed through the air. Yes, Ethan. If that's what it takes to make you see sense, then yes. You owe me this respect, this acknowledgement. And until you realize that, I'll do whatever it takes to remind you. The room went still, shocked silence filling the space as Carol's admission continued to play. I watched as realization dawned on each face, people exchanging glances, finally understanding the truth. As the recording ended, I turned to face Carol directly, seeing the shock and anger bloom in her expression. She looked around, seeing the glares, the betrayal on the faces of the people she'd once counted as supporters. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling, right here, in front of her. "Ethan, this is ridiculous," she finally sputtered, her voice wavering with desperation. I was only trying to help. You've misunderstood everything. You twisted my words." I shook my head, refusing to let her manipulate the situation any further. "No, Carol, you weren't helping me. You were controlling me, sabotaging me because you wanted credit for things that were never yours to claim. You wanted ownership of my life, and when I refused, you did everything in your power to ruin it." I could see the shock spreading through the room, family members who'd once respected Carol now seeing her in a completely different light. My mother's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together as though fighting back tears. My father looked angry, betrayal etched in his features. Friends who'd once sided with Carol seemed horrified, realizing they'd been misled, used as pawns in her twisted game. One of Carol's friends, an older woman named Linda who'd been close with her for years, finally spoke up, her voice a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. "Carol, is this true? Did you really try to sabotage Ethan's life because he wouldn't acknowledge you?" Carol's face turned red, her composure unraveling as she realized just how many bridges she'd burned. "You don't understand," she snapped, her voice harsh and defensive. "I did everything for him. He's nothing without me." I felt a surge of both anger and relief. Her words, finally spoken aloud in front of everyone, were the final nail in the coffin. No one was going to see her the same way again. She'd revealed herself, her need for control, her desire for credit over a life that was never hers to claim. My father stood, his voice filled with quiet fury. "Carol, this is beyond unacceptable. Family supports each other, yes, but we don't control each other. You betrayed everything family stands for." Carol opened her mouth to argue, but the room had already turned against her. The reality of her actions, exposed for everyone to see, had shattered the respect and admiration she'd once commanded. She was isolated, a figure clinging desperately to a delusion that no one would support any longer. As people began to gather their things, murmuring among themselves, Carol stood alone, a shadow of the powerful, controlling woman she'd once been. She looked at me one last time, her face a mixture of fury and desperation. "You'll regret this, Ethan," she hissed, her voice barely audible. "You think you're free of me, but you'll never really be free." I held her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, I am, Carol. I'm free because I'm choosing my own life, and nothing you say or do can take that from me." Without another word, she stormed out, leaving behind a silence filled with relief and closure. As the door shut behind her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying. People began coming up to me, offering apologies, admitting that they'd let Carol's words cloud their judgment. I could see the genuine regret in their faces, and though it hurt to think of the trust I'd lost because of her, I was grateful to finally be moving forward. That night, Haley and I went back to my apartment, where we sat in quiet relief, processing everything that had happened. I felt lighter, the chains of Carol's influence broken, leaving me with a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. As I looked at Haley, I realized just how grateful I was to have people in my life who saw me for who I truly was, people who loved me without demanding anything in return. "Thank you," I said softly, reaching for her hand, "for sticking with me through all of this." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "Ethan, you don't owe anyone your success or your happiness. It's yours, and you've earned every bit of it." In the days that followed, I began to repair the relationships Carol had damaged. I reconnected with Lucas, explaining everything, and he quickly realized how manipulative Carol had been. Friends and colleagues came around, reassured by the truth and my willingness to be open. And as for my career, I threw myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to build something that no one could take credit for except me. Carol's influence faded, her reputation tarnished, her allies dwindling as word spread of what she tried to do. The family gatherings she once controlled felt lighter without her, as though everyone had shed a collective weight. I knew she'd be a part of my life story, but only as a lesson, a reminder that no one owns my success, and no one has a right to my choices. In the end, I emerged from her grasp with a clarity and resilience I hadn't known before. My life was my own, and that freedom, hard won, was worth more than anything she could ever give.